a small coastal town in California, an engaged couple disappeared without a trace, leaving their beach house untouched as if they had simply vanished into thin air. On a Friday night, Meredith and David, both 28, seemingly walked into the ocean and never returned. For 5 years, authorities believed they had drowned in the treacherous waters, swept away by unexpected currents during a late-night swim. But everything changed when a recreational diver exploring the nearby reef stumbled upon something wedged in the coral, a waterproof case holding evidence that would unravel a far more unsettling truth than anyone could have imagined. Janine Caldwell, now 35, had built a stable life as a financial analyst far from the coastal town where her sister had disappeared. She was deep into her morning routine when her phone rang, cutting through the quiet of her apartment. It was Detective Raymond Flores from the Monterey County Sheriff's Office. "Ms. Caldwell," his voice was calm but urgent, "we need you to come down. A diver found something about 300 yards off the coast near the beach house. We need you to confirm if it's your sister's." The news made Janine's heart race. After 5 years, any update on Meredith still held weight. "What did they find?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "A waterproof phone case, bright yellow. It's wedged in the coral. The diver brought it in. Can you drive down today?" "I'll leave right now." The 2-hour drive along Highway 101 felt both endless and swift. As she drove, Janine's mind replayed the events that had never stopped haunting her: the engagement party at the beach house, the celebration that ended in heartbreak. Meredith and David had been so full of life, so ready to begin their future together. But that Friday night, they vanished without a trace, leaving only their cars in the driveway. When Janine arrived at the Marine Patrol Station, she was met by Detective Flores. He led her down narrow hallways, their steps echoing in the empty building, until they reached the evidence room, where the case sat on a sterile white table. The yellow case, now opened, held Meredith's iPhone, its rose gold case gleaming after 5 years submerged underwater. But beside it, Janine froze. A pregnancy test. Her heart sank. "Oh my God," she gasped, sinking into the chair Flores offered. She was pregnant. The detective nodded. "That's what we're trying to confirm. The phone's still working. These cases are pretty effective. We charged it up, and here's the last photo on the lock screen. Meredith and David on that very beach. You took this, right?" Janine nodded, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, it was from their engagement party, 3 months before they disappeared." The detective scrolled through the phone. The last activity was that Friday evening. Some texts, some photos, nothing unusual, no signs of distress. Janine couldn't take her eyes off the pregnancy test. "Does it show anything?" "The display's degraded, but our experts believe it was likely positive. People don't usually keep a negative test, especially not in a waterproof case like this. This discovery changed everything. We'll need to revisit everything," the detective continued. The initial assumption was drowning. The couple vanishes, no signs of struggle, no issues in their relationship. Drowning seemed like the only explanation. But now, a pregnancy, that's a major event. It means they likely had plans, they had expectations. This changes the whole investigation. We need to look at their relationships, their plans, and anyone who might have known about the pregnancy. Janine's mind raced as she shook her head. I never knew. We talked every week, sometimes more. She never mentioned it." Janine's heart ached as she stared at the page. "David doesn't know yet." The words were a punch to her gut, the secret Meredith had kept hidden, a secret that had now become a painful piece of the puzzle. It wasn't just the pregnancy that had been kept quiet. It was the uncertainty, the emotional weight of it all that she had chosen to carry alone. She turned the pages carefully, each entry revealing more about her sister's hidden struggle. "I'm not sure if I'm ready. I thought we'd wait until after the wedding. But this is happening. What if I'm not good enough to be a mom? What if it changes everything between David and me?" Janine paused. It was clear that Meredith had been trying to figure out not only the logistics of the pregnancy, but the emotional impact it might have on her relationship with David. I don't want to burden him, but I need to tell him soon. I don't want to keep this from him. The entries grew more frantic as the week progressed. David's been distant lately, and I'm scared that I'm imagining things. We've been planning so much. He's been so busy with work, and I don't know how to tell him I'm pregnant with our child. I don't want to lose him, but I can't do this alone. Janine's chest tightened as she continued reading. Meredith had been carrying this weight alone, unsure of what to do, how to tell the man she loved most in the world. And now, 5 years later, this was the final message her sister had left behind. With shaky hands, Janine closed the journal and held it to her chest. The room felt colder now, the memories of her sister's last days haunting every corner. Everything in this house was a reminder of what could have been. The laughter, the joy, the plans for the future. They had all been ripped away without warning. She stood up slowly, the journal still pressed tightly in her hands. Her mind raced with 1,000 questions. What had really happened that night? Was this disappearance tied to the secret Meredith had been carrying? And most importantly, was David involved in this tragedy in a way she hadn't yet imagined? Janine knew one thing for sure. This case was far from over. It was just beginning. The truth, however dark and twisted, was waiting to be uncovered, and she wouldn't rest until she found it. Janine's hands trembled as she continued to absorb the significance of the journal's last entry. Meredith had been ready to tell David. She'd planned to share the news that would have forever changed their lives. And then, just hours later, everything had spiraled. It wasn't just the pregnancy. It was the hope Meredith had carried with her into that Friday dinner, hoping the news would heal the rift between David and Marcus. But instead, it had become part of a mystery, a secret lost to the ocean. The quiet of the room was suddenly broken by a soft knock on the door. Harold stood in the doorway, his face creased with concern. "Just checking if you need anything, Miss Janine. Water? I could make some tea." "I'm fine, Harold. Thank you." Janine pressed the journal closer to her chest, trying to find some semblance of peace amid the overwhelming swirl of emotions. She wasn't sure if she was looking for closure or if closure would ever come. Harold nodded understandingly. "Take all the time you need. I'll be outside if you change your mind about that tea." As the door closed behind him, Janine sat alone in the stillness of Meredith's room, the weight of the journal heavy in her hands. Meredith had been carrying so much more than just a secret pregnancy. She had walked into that dinner with the hope that it might bring everyone back together, that it would ease the tensions between David and Marcus, but instead, she had vanished, leaving her future and her hopes behind. The sudden sound of tires on gravel brought her back to the present. She stood up and glanced out the window. A black Tesla Model S pulled into the driveway, its sleek design in stark contrast to the weathered beach house. Janine's heart skipped a beat as she recognized the driver, Marcus Ashford. He emerged from the car, exuding the same confident, polished energy that had made him a fixture in the Silicon Valley elite. The years had been kind to him. Though his hair was flecked with gray at the temples, he still cut an impressive figure in his tailored navy suit. The power of success radiated from him. Every detail, from his Italian leather shoes to his titanium watch, was perfectly in place. When his eyes met hers through the window, surprise flickered across his face. By the time she reached the front door, he was already stepping onto the porch, his arms open in greeting. "Janine, my God, I had no idea you were in town." His embrace was warm, the familiar scent of his cologne enveloping her. But as they pulled apart, she studied his face closely. She'd always seen the boyish charm in him, the charisma that had made him successful, but now it was more refined. Still, his eyes, those dark eyes, held that same intensity she remembered. "Come in," she said, gesturing toward the living room. I was just... She trailed off, unsure of what to say. Of course. I don't want to intrude, Marcus replied, his gaze sweeping the room. God, it's like stepping back in time, isn't it? Janine settled on the couch, and Marcus took the chair across from her. His expression had shifted now, a faint unease settling in. That's actually why I'm here, she said, trying to steady her voice. There's been a development. A diver found Meredith's phone this morning in a waterproof case near the reef. Marcus went still, his eyes widening. Her phone? With something else? Janine watched him closely, her heart racing. A pregnancy test, she said softly. Marcus's reaction was immediate. His hand went to his chest as if the words had physically struck him. What? No, that can't be right. Meredith was pregnant? It appears so, Janine replied, her voice tight. The police are reopening the investigation. Marcus seemed frozen for a moment, struggling to process the information. The calm, controlled demeanor he had always carried with him was slipping, revealing a man who hadn't anticipated this revelation. The shock in his eyes was unmistakable. As Janine stared at him, she couldn't help but wonder what had really happened that night. What did Marcus know or not know about Meredith's life in those final days? And most importantly, why had she kept this secret from David? Janine turned, startled, as the woman approached. She looked familiar, though Janine couldn't place where she had seen her before. The name Elena rang a bell. She had seen her occasionally during visits to the beach house over the years, a quiet presence in the background, but today her nervous energy was hard to ignore. Yes, I'm Elena, Harold's wife, the woman repeated, offering a hesitant smile. I didn't mean to disturb you, but Harold mentioned you were in town. I wanted to make sure everything was all right. Janine's instincts kicked in, a subtle discomfort rising within her. She had been deep in thought about her conversation with Marcus, but now something in Elena's tone seemed to cut through her thoughts. Elena didn't seem like she was merely checking in. There was something else beneath the surface, an unspoken urgency in her words. I'm fine, Janine said, her voice steady despite the twinge of unease. Just taking everything in. It's a lot to process. Elena nodded, her eyes darting again to the parking lot, as if searching for something or someone. I can imagine it's been a long time, hasn't it? She asked, her voice soft but tinged with something else, something Janine couldn't quite read. Yes, 5 years. Janine felt a sharp pang in her chest at the reminder. Everything feels so unfinished. I understand, Elena said quickly, her eyes now locking onto Janine's with an almost pleading look. If you ever need anything at all, please don't hesitate to ask. Harold and I, we've always been here for you. For all of them. Janine studied her for a moment, her mind processing the sudden shift in Elena's demeanor. She seemed almost desperate, like she was trying to convey something more, something important, but she couldn't quite bring herself to say it. Thank you, Elena, Janine said slowly, sensing that the conversation was teetering on the edge of something else. I appreciate that. The woman hesitated, her lips parting as if she wanted to say more, but in the end, she simply nodded. If you need anything, please just let me know. She gave Janine a look that seemed to linger a moment too long before turning and walking quickly toward the parking lot. Janine watched her leave, her unease growing. Something about the interaction didn't sit right with her. Why had Elena been so nervous? What was it that she wasn't saying? And why had she mentioned Harold so many times, almost as if it were a signal? As the sound of Elena's footsteps faded, Janine felt the weight of the situation pressing down on her once again. She needed answers. Something about Marcus's story, the conversations she'd had, and now this strange encounter with Elena, it all felt disconnected, like pieces of a puzzle that didn't quite fit. She walked along the marina's edge, the familiar sights and sounds of the bustling pier not providing the comfort she had hoped for. Instead, they only deepened her sense of disquiet. Her sister's disappearance was no longer just an unsolved mystery. It was becoming a story with hidden layers, and Janine could feel that she was just beginning to peel them back. Janine stood there, feeling the weight of Marcus's words pressing on her chest. He was playing it off so easily, brushing aside the oddities she'd noticed. The tarps, the bleach, the fishing gear. Everything in the room, every piece of it, seemed designed to deflect attention from something deeper, something that had been left hidden beneath the surface. The questions swirling in her mind grew heavier with every word he said, but Marcus wasn't finished. As he chatted casually about fishing, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was all just a performance, an attempt to reassure her that everything was normal when she knew it wasn't. "Well, you know, fishing is always a good way to clear your head," he continued, his voice light, almost too light, especially after all the stress with the business and everything that happened with David. "Yeah," Janine said, her throat tight. "I guess it is." She felt her eyes drifting toward the tarps again, the heavy-duty kind used in construction, the bleach-scented containers lining the shelves. There was no mistaking the smell. It was so strong now, it seemed to hang in the air like a cloud, thick and unsettling. It was too much to ignore. Something about this place, the way it was all laid out, felt wrong. There was too much effort to keep it looking like an ordinary boathouse, but the feeling in the pit of her stomach told her it was anything but. "Sorry, I didn't mean to snoop around," she said, her voice betraying a sense of unease. Marcus waved it off, his smile as charming as ever. "Don't worry about it. I should have been more careful with the door." He motioned toward the shelf, casually brushing past the stack of tarps. "But you see, it's all part of the job. You get a little bit of everything when you own a boat, especially one that big." Janine nodded slowly, but her mind was elsewhere, thinking back to what Elena had said. The boat, the way it had left the dock at 2:00 in the morning. She hadn't wanted to believe it, but the pieces were starting to fall into place. Marcus was too polished, too comfortable, and the more she looked around, the more it seemed like he was hiding something. The bleach, the tarps, the boat not being there, it didn't add up. "You know," Janine said carefully, trying to keep her voice neutral, "I never really got a chance to thank you properly for everything you did for the house. It's been a lot sorting through all of this." Marcus turned back toward her, his expression shifting slightly. "Of course," he said, his tone almost too soft, as though trying to seem more sincere. "I just did what I could. They were family to me too." There it was again, that familiar phrase. They were family. But Janine wasn't sure she could trust him. Not anymore. Not with all the inconsistencies she'd seen. Not with everything that had been said and left unsaid. "I'll let you get back to your work," she said quickly, standing up. The unease was creeping into her voice now, and she couldn't ignore it any longer. "Thanks again for everything." Marcus nodded, but his gaze lingered on her, something unreadable in his eyes. "Anytime, Janine," he said, his voice smooth and reassuring. "If you need anything else, don't hesitate to ask." As Janine walked toward the door, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had just been given a glimpse into something much darker than she had ever imagined. Marcus's polished exterior, the boathouse, the fishing gear, it all felt like a facade, something to hide the truth that she was starting to uncover piece by piece. The questions now were louder than ever. What had really happened that night? What was Marcus hiding? And how far would he go to keep the answers buried? Janine paused, her eyes lingering on the pages in front of her. The proposal was ambitious, almost overwhelmingly so. She could practically hear Marcus's voice in her mind, boasting about the global expansion, the new markets, the vision for Innovate Tech to go international. Offices in London, Tokyo, Singapore, and Sao Paulo within 18 months. The figures projected massive growth, an exponential rise in revenue that would secure the company's place among the giants of the industry. But as Janine skimmed through the numbers, something didn't sit right. There were discrepancies, minor things, figures that seemed optimistic, timelines that felt rushed, and a few lines that were eerily vague about financial risks. She found herself frowning. Had Marcus truly believed in this plan, or was it just a way to distract from something deeper? She set the proposal down and reached for the next document in the folder. The next few pages were a set of meeting minutes from a board discussion a few weeks before Meredith and David's disappearance. It was a typical corporate back and forth about expansion, budgets, and potential partners. But what caught Janine's attention was a brief mention of a disagreement between Marcus and David. David had raised concerns about the rapid pace of expansion. He questioned whether it was too soon for such bold moves, especially with the company still stabilizing after some of their previous projects. The disagreement seemed to have been brushed aside in favor of Marcus's vision, but there was one detail that stood out. David had asked about the potential for taking on debt to fund the expansion, and the document suggested that Marcus had been insistent on not using debt, which raised an interesting point. If they weren't going to use debt, how would they fund these massive global offices? Janine felt the knot in her stomach tighten. What was Marcus hiding? She couldn't shake the feeling that the expansion was more than just a business decision. It was too important to Marcus, too tightly tied to his personal ambitions. But why would he push it so hard, especially when David seemed so hesitant? The sound of Marcus moving above deck pulled Janine from her thoughts. She glanced up at the cabin door and found him standing there, his diving gear in hand. He was smiling, the same charismatic smile that had always put people at ease. "Ready to dive?" he asked, his voice full of energy. Janine nodded slowly, tucking the papers back into the folder. "I'll be up in a minute." Marcus handed her the diving mask and tanks with practiced ease. "Take your time. The ocean's waiting for us." Janine stood up and made her way back to the deck, the papers still fresh in her mind. As she looked out across the vast expanse of ocean, her mind began to race. The deep, dark water stretched before her, unyielding and unpredictable, just like the situation she found herself in. Marcus was hiding something, that much was clear, and she wasn't going to stop until she figured out what. Janine's heart slammed against her chest as Marcus casually, almost effortlessly, produced the gun. Her mind raced. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to get away from this man who had been a friend to David, a partner in the business, and yet was now revealing himself to be something else entirely. She couldn't move, her body frozen, her mind trying to process what was happening, what she had just discovered. Marcus looked at her with cold, calculating eyes. The transformation was jarring, like someone flipping a switch from grief-stricken to something darker. He was no longer the friend who had offered comfort and company, but a man whose desperation was palpable. "Don't make this worse than it already is, Janine," Marcus said, his voice low and steady, but with a note of finality. "You don't have to be a part of this, but you need to understand that you've crossed a line. You've been digging too deep." Janine forced herself to breathe, to stay calm, though every nerve in her body screamed at her to act. She took a small, measured step backward, her hand subtly inching toward the side of the boat, where the dock was just a short distance away. But she knew that Marcus was fast, too fast, and the pistol in his hand made her feel more vulnerable than she had ever felt in her life. I don't know what you mean," she stammered, trying to keep her voice steady, to make him believe her, but it sounded hollow even to her own ears. "I didn't mean to." "Don't lie," Marcus interrupted, stepping closer. The gun was still casually held in one hand, as if he were used to it, as if it were an extension of himself. "You figured it out. You saw the expansion documents. You saw the desperation in my eyes, didn't you? You saw the way I've been acting. All of it. Too perfect. Too controlled. But now you know, don't you? Now you know what really happened that night." Janine's mind spun as she tried to think, to find a way out. a way to escape. She couldn't make herself move any faster. Every muscle felt heavy, like she was underwater, struggling for air. The boat, the business, the gun, her thoughts were spiraling. She had suspected Marcus, but now her suspicions were becoming terrifyingly clear. David and Meredith, she whispered, the names barely escaping her lips. She had to keep him talking, keep him distracted. Did you hurt them? The words felt foreign coming out, but she couldn't stop herself. The corner of Marcus's mouth twitched, just a little, like he was amused by her question. His voice was calm, controlled, too controlled. I didn't hurt anyone, Janine. Not the way you're thinking. But I did what I had to do to preserve everything I worked for. His eyes darkened. This wasn't about them. It was about everything we built. Everything I've sacrificed to get this far. I couldn't let them destroy it. Not when it was within reach. Janine's pulse quickened, panic rising in her chest. You couldn't let them ruin it? You couldn't let David walk away, so you... She stopped herself before the words came tumbling out. She couldn't let him see the full realization in her eyes. She couldn't show him the truth that had been forming in her mind. Marcus stepped closer, the gun now aimed loosely at the deck, as if it was a mere accessory. You don't understand, he said softly, almost sympathetically. You think you know me. You think you know how far I'd go. But you haven't even scratched the surface, Janine. His words hung in the air like a threat. Every part of her screamed to act, to fight back, but she had no weapon, no means of escape. Marcus had taken control of the situation with unsettling ease. The gun, the boat, the years of friendship, they all gave him an undeniable advantage. I didn't want it to come to this, Marcus continued, his tone almost apologetic, as if he was trying to justify the unthinkable. I really didn't, but sometimes you have to make choices, and I made mine. Janine's mind raced, her heart pounding. She needed to think. She needed to make a move. She couldn't let him get away with this. She couldn't let him silence her, not after everything that had happened. Marcus, she said, her voice shaking but determined. You won't get away with this. His eyes narrowed, but there was no surprise in his expression, only resignation, like he had expected this. I already have, Janine. The finality in his voice struck her like a blow. He wasn't worried. He thought he had it all figured out. But Janine wasn't going to let him win. She wasn't going to let him silence her, no matter the cost. She could only pray that somehow, some way, she would find a way out of this nightmare. Janine's mind reeled, the cold weight of Marcus's words settling into her gut like lead. She couldn't breathe. Prepared for multiple outcomes? What did that mean? Was he admitting it so easily? She tried to steady her nerves, to push past the rising tide of panic. Her only hope was that her SOS had reached the Coast Guard, that someone, anyone, was on their way. But everything Marcus said made the world feel smaller, the stakes higher, and her hope slimmer by the second. Marcus continued, seemingly oblivious to the impact of his words. His voice was disturbingly calm, almost detached. I came prepared, he repeated, his gaze fixed on the horizon, the gun still aimed in her direction. But I didn't act immediately. No, that would have been too obvious. I watched them for a while, watched David's excitement grow, heard him talk about the future, about stability, about how everything had to change now. Janine couldn't stop herself from shaking. She could feel the cool ocean breeze against her skin, the gentle rocking of the boat, and the sharp edge of Marcus's calm, deliberate confession. His words were like ice, cutting through her like a knife. He looked back at her, eyes dark and unyielding. I had to give them time. Let them think everything was fine. Let David believe he was going to build that family. But Meredith, she was a part of it too. She didn't realize what she was doing, what that announcement meant for me, for everything I had worked for. She was naive. The words seemed to hang in the air between them like an accusation. Naive. Janine's chest tightened. She was struggling to understand how the man she'd once trusted, the man who had been David's closest friend, could be capable of such cold calculation. "You didn't just kill them," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of the ocean. "You destroyed their dreams. You let them think they could have it all, and then you took it from them." Her voice trembled as the realization hit her like a wave. She couldn't even bring herself to say the words she needed to. Marcus's face twisted into something almost imperceptible, sorrow or guilt, maybe, but it quickly dissolved into anger. He looked down at the gun in his hand, as though it were a necessary tool, something to control the situation. The business, the expansion, everything we planned, it was all for nothing, Janine. They chose family over all of it. They chose the future, and it wasn't a future I could have with them. Janine felt her breath catch, her mind scrambling to process everything he was saying. This man was David's brother in everything but blood. He had built a life with him, sacrificed everything with him, and now he had killed him for it. Her stomach churned. Did you really think you could just walk away from all of this? That you could hide what you did and move on? That you could kill 2 people and get away with it? Her voice rose in disbelief, a knot of rage and sorrow threatening to choke her words. How do you justify that to yourself? Marcus didn't flinch. He didn't even seem to be bothered by the weight of her words. Justifying it? He shook his head, the corner of his mouth lifting in something like a bitter smile. I don't need to justify it, Janine. I did what had to be done, and you are going to be the one to help me cover it up. Janine's heart stopped. She felt the pulse of panic rise up inside her like a tidal wave. No, she wouldn't let him do this. She wouldn't be his accomplice. She couldn't, not after everything she had learned. She glanced toward the shore, still so far away, and her hand subtly crept toward the side of the boat, toward the escape she had been praying for. You're not getting away with this, Marcus, she said, her voice low but resolute. You can't just make me an accomplice in your twisted plan. For the first time since the gun had appeared, Marcus's expression faltered. His grip on the weapon tightened, but his eyes, for a fleeting moment, seemed to search hers. You think you have a choice? You think you can go back to shore and tell the world what happened? You think anyone will believe you? He paused, his gaze hardening. You think anyone will care about your story when it's just one more dead end? No one will even know you were out here with me, Janine. You'll just be another ghost in the ocean. The weight of his threat hung over her like a suffocating fog. She tried not to let the fear seep into her voice, but she couldn't help herself. I'll find a way. There are always ways. Marcus stepped closer, the gun never wavering, his voice softening slightly. Don't make this harder than it has to be. You're smarter than this, Janine. You know that what I'm asking is just a matter of surviving. All we have is survival now. Janine's mind spun, her chest tightening as she weighed the gravity of the situation. She could feel the cold metal of the gun pressing against her, both a threat and a challenge. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about fighting for the truth. And she wasn't going to let Marcus Ashford get away with it. The weight of the situation seemed to press down on Janine with every breath. Her mind was still spinning from the harrowing events that had just unfolded. She had come so close to death, yet somehow, miraculously, she had survived. The Coast Guard had been just in time, their cutter slicing through the water like a beacon of hope. But as she sat there now, in the sterile emergency room, the adrenaline was beginning to fade, leaving her with a deep sense of exhaustion, both physically and emotionally. The nurse, her movements efficient but gentle, worked in silence, her face a neutral mask. Janine barely registered the sting as the nurse applied antiseptic to the marks on her skin. Her mind was still replaying Marcus's words, the coldness of his confession, and the sheer madness of it all. She had never imagined that her brother-in-law, someone she had trusted, could be capable of such horror. The nurse finished with the documentation and stepped back, her voice soft but concerned. "You'll need some rest, Ms. Caldwell. The doctor will be in shortly to check on you." She gave Janine a sympathetic look before leaving the room, leaving her alone with her thoughts. Janine's fingers gripped the edges of the examination table as she tried to steady herself. She wanted to cry, to scream, to let the shock and the grief out, but something inside her was holding it all back. Instead, she just sat there, breathing deeply, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. It was impossible to believe, but the reality of Marcus's betrayal had become painfully clear. His obsession with the business, the ruthless way he had manipulated everything around him, and the cold, calculated way he had disposed of David and Meredith, it was all too much. The last moments she had spent with Marcus, watching him fall from the grieving friend to the dangerous monster, would haunt her forever. The door to the exam room opened, and a doctor stepped in, his kind face offering some comfort in the midst of the chaos. "Ms. Caldwell, how are you feeling?" he asked, his voice gentle but probing. "Alive," she whispered, almost laughing at how absurd it sounded. "I'm alive." The doctor nodded, taking note of her bruises, checking her pulse, and asking routine questions. He was professional, efficient, but there was a quiet sympathy in his eyes. He could see that the physical injuries were just the surface of something far deeper. "I know it's been a long day for you," he said after a few moments, his tone softening. "You're safe now. You're going to get through this, but you need to talk to someone about what you've experienced. Trauma like this," he paused, searching for the right words, "it can weigh heavily on a person. You shouldn't have to carry it alone." Janine didn't answer right away. She just sat there, staring at the doctor as her mind drifted back to the boat, to the cold emptiness of the ocean, and to the bitter face of Marcus as he was dragged away. His last words still echoed in her mind. "You should have stayed away." "I will," she finally whispered, her voice shaking. "I'll talk to someone, but right now, I just need to figure out how to move forward." The doctor gave her a reassuring nod, as though understanding the enormity of her words. He finished his examination, wrote a prescription for pain relief, and advised her to take it easy. "We'll have a counselor check on you before you leave, but right now, you need rest. Let your body recover." Janine nodded, grateful for the doctor's understanding, but her thoughts were already drifting back to the wreckage that Marcus had left in his wake. The company, the lies, the lives he had destroyed, everything he had sacrificed to satisfy his own ambitions. The truth was, it wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about ensuring that what had happened to David and Meredith didn't disappear into the ocean like their bodies had. They deserved justice. They deserved to be remembered. And as long as she could stand, Janine vowed she would be the one to make sure their story was heard, no matter how difficult it would be. The hospital room, with its sterile walls and faint beeping monitors, seemed to close in around her as the weight of everything settled in. But there was a flicker of something deeper in her, a fire sparked by the betrayal, by the lives lost, by everything Marcus had taken. Janine wasn't sure how she would move forward, but she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't going to let Marcus's actions define her or her family. Not now, not ever. She would find the strength to bring the truth to light, no matter what it took. Janine's hands trembled as she clutched Meredith's journal, the weight of the truth pressing down on her with every passing second. The cold, unrelenting rain outside mirrored the turmoil in her heart. The journal felt like the only connection left to the life her sister and David had once shared, the life they had dreamed of, now forever gone. The words in the journal seemed to blur as the tears fell, mixing with the ink that Meredith had written with such hope. Some instinct warned her, but she pushed through it. The thought echoed in Janine's mind, a haunting reminder that Meredith had known, deep down, that something wasn't right, but had dismissed it in favor of the joy she felt about the baby she was carrying. Detective Flores remained quiet beside her, giving her space, but his presence was a steady anchor in the chaos. The finality of Marcus's confession, the forensics, the GPS logs, the bodies, had brought her closer to justice, but nothing could undo the damage he had caused. Nothing could bring Meredith and David back. "They were supposed to be happy," Janine whispered, the words feeling like a broken prayer. "They were supposed to have a future." "I know," Flores said gently, his voice thick with empathy, "and they were taken from you because of greed. But you've done what you can. You brought this to light." Janine nodded, her chest tight. "I don't know what to do with all of it now. It's done, but it's not done, is it? The pain doesn't just go away." "No," Flores agreed. "It never does. But this won't be forgotten, Janine. You fought for them. You gave them the justice they deserved. And now Marcus will face the consequences of what he did." Her mind flickered back to the boat, to Marcus's chilling confession and the coldness in his eyes. How could someone who had shared so much of their lives work side by side with David, gone so far to destroy it all for his own ambitions? And how had he continued to play the part of the grieving friend, the hero, for 5 long years? Janine exhaled slowly, wiping her face as she tried to find some semblance of peace. The storm outside intensified, the rhythmic sound of the rain tapping against the window, a reminder of the passage of time. She had the truth now, but in a way, it felt like the final chapter to a story that could never have a happy ending. She glanced down at Meredith's journal again, her fingers brushing over the words that had been written in the final weeks of her sister's life. David was her future. The baby was their hope. Janine closed the journal with a quiet finality. She had no more answers to search for, only the long road ahead, the weight of her sister's dreams, and the reality of what she had lost. In the distance, she heard the faint hum of the rain, the world outside washed clean by the storm. Yet in her heart, the storm would rage on. The grief, the loss, the fight for justice, it was all too much to bear. But she would keep going. For Meredith, for David, for the baby who never had a chance, and for herself, because in the end, they weren't just gone. They were the reason she would continue, no matter the storm.